Yo, what is good, everybody? It's your boy Tej, and today I'm be showing y'all how industry producers such as Metro, ATL, Jacob, and Quay Global mix their beats. I have an example beat. I'll just be kind of showing y'all how I go through, level it, and put some effects on it, and I'll be showing y'all a little bit of my master chain and how I go about mixing my beats. I'm not going to spend too much time on sound selection and arrangement of the beats. It's mostly just going to be how to mix them. So hopefully y'all enjoyed this video, and let's just hop right into the beat. So this first clip right here is recorded on a different day from the other stuff that I recorded. This is a point that I did not mention in the video that I thought was really important. So before we get started, I just want to go ahead and mention it. There's a technique in mixing called gain staging, and how you do it in FL Studio is you go to these little volume knobs right here and you adjust it accordingly before you actually go into the mixer right here and you start adjusting all the volume knobs here. And the reason why you do that is for sounds like your 808s, kicks, and other louder sounds, you don't want those to clip. And if you just go into the mixer and you turn all these down, they're still gonna clip, they'll just be quieter. So if you want a cleaner sound, you want something that is a lot more powerful while also limiting the amount of clipping and harshness you get, you want to go and gain stage by using these volume knobs in the channel rack, not in your mixer rack. Of course, adjusting the volume in your mixer rack is equally as important. It's very important that you gain stage it here so that the rest of your mix sounds great. All right, so starting off with this melody, I just got some Analog Lab sounds and I stemmed them out. All right, so first thing I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna show y'all the MIDI and stuff with my melody before effects and after effects, and I'm just gonna go through and show y'all how I went and did the rest of the beat. First thing I opened was this Analog Lab, and I just got some presets, so the melody originally just sounds like this. Threw that into a mixer, and I added some EQ just to cut out some of the high and the low, and just cut out some of the mids so we can give some room for the other stuff. And so when mixing your beats, you really want to make sure that you don't want your melody sounds to have too much excess bass, because you don't want it to interfere with your bass sounds and your 808s and kicks, etc. And you also want to cut some of the mids and the low mids, just some of those like kind of muddier frequencies that might dig into your beat later. And just to cut out some of the highs, just to make it sound a little more crisp and a little more closed. That way it doesn't sound like it's just kind of bleeding everywhere. And a lot of sounds will have harsh frequencies past the 5 kilohertz range. And so sometimes you want to just cut those out. And then so I threw some Valhalla Supermassive on, and with this plugin, if you put the warp all the way to 100%, it changes the preset purely from delay to a reverb sound. So then that way it sounds a little more open and a little wider. And on a lot of more ambient melodies, you kind of want to have some space or something wider to kind of go with your beat. And then I threw a chorus on it just to give it a little bit more of like that stereo depth sort of effect. And also just it gives its own type of style. And I really just like using chorus on ambient melodies like this. And so the rendered out version sounds something like this. So the next melody sound I got was this. And for this sound, I ended up putting a low cut on it. And to get this really steep cut, what you do is you right click on it, you go to order, put it on steep 8. Once you've done that, right click it on again and put low shelf or high pass. And like I said previously, you want to cut the low mids and the mids just so you can give space for some of the other elements in your beat. Then I throw in some RC20 retro color, and this preset is really good for giving you that like tape finally effect. If you don't have that, a good free alternative would be like isotope vinyl. It gives you like the same detune effects. It just doesn't quite give you all the options that RC20 does. With this, adding some space and some decay, like I said, just kind of opens it up and it makes it sound fuller. The final rendered out version of that sounds something like this. So then I added a synth bass sound, and I'm not really going to show you all the MIDI. It's pretty simple. The only thing I did with this one is I just threw it in the mixer and leveled it. I want my first two melodies to be around -18 to -21 decibels, just because they're more ambient and I want them to sit a little more in the background, but they still have their own sort of character to them. So with the first one, You can see that both of those kind of sit in that -18, -21 range. And so for synth basses and sub basses, stuff like that, you probably want those to sit around like the -15, -12 range. And then lastly, I added like this kind of ambient vocal. And you want something like that to probably be in the -24, -21 range. All right, so after arranging that melody a little bit and exporting it, I brought it into a new FLP, and this is where I started adding the drums and all that. So just a quick preview of what the beat looks like. I'll break down each element of the drums and how I mix those. So, all right, so for the claps, you usually want those to be in the -18 to -12 range. Typically, I let them peak at about -15. Some beats, it might be necessary to boost them up to -12, but sometimes that could be a little too harsh. Your hi-hats, you want those to be in the -21 to -18 dB range, and those fluctuate a lot, especially like if you're adding rolls and you're changing the velocities and whatnot. So you don't have to follow that one too much to a T, because sometimes it goes a little over -18, sometimes it goes a little below -21, etc. But typically I try to say keep that at about -18 dB. For your 808s, I'd say keep that in the -9 to -6 range, just so it has enough power, but it's also not drowned out by your kick. Typically for most of my beats, I always prioritize the kicks, so the kicks gonna end up being louder than the 808. Is in the range of like -9 to -3 in very extreme cases, but typically I mix my kick to about -6 dBs. And for your open hats, you probably want those to peak at about -21 decibels. Maybe -18, just depending on the beat you got, but usually in that range should suit pretty well. And then so perks, it really just depends on what type of perk you have. If it's something that's real high pitched and ringy, you probably want that to be from like -24 to -21. And if it's just something like a rim shot or like a snare, something similar to that, you could probably get away with moving that to -21 and -18. For my snares, I personally like leaving them in the -18 to -15 range. Leaving those in that typical range gives it enough to where it doesn't overpower your clap. At the same time, you can still hear it with the rest of the elements of your beat. So using all those, you can see in the mixer, our beat sounds something like this. And then lastly, for the effects, so for your risers and other sort of effects, typically I keep them panned to the left, and I like to have them in the -15 to -12 dB range. And sometimes that just kind of comes down to personal preference. Certain ones might be louder than others, just depending on how bassy they are. So this effect is kind of more on the bassy side, so it might need to be a little louder so it can kind of cut through the mix a little better. For crashes, they probably sit around -15 dB. Just because they're a little higher, they can be quieter than your effects. All right, so for the panning of each of your things, I'd say the melody, you probably want it to be as stereoized as possible. So sometimes if your melody sounds a little too close, you can go to this little knob right here in FL20, scrolls, and you can see in the top left that it says it is now 50% separated. So all that does is just increases the stereo separation. So if you're wearing headphones, it's really easy to tell. You can hear the melody kind of go more into stereo than it is in mono. For things like your claps, 808, kicks, you probably want to leave those in mono. If your sample that you have is not in mono, what you could do is you could go to that same knob and turn it to the other side and go to 100%. If it says 100% merge, that means it'll be in mono, so then that way you don't have to worry about stereo on either side. Closed hi-hats are typically panned a little bit to the left. Snares are also in mono. Open hi-hats are usually panned to the right. And with perks, you can kind of just pan them either way, just up to you. And another mixing tip is mix your beat in mono and mix them quietly. How you want to mix them in mono, what you could do is you go to your master, go to the same stereo separation knob I was mentioning before, and you can go put it to 100% merge. So now you'll be mixing in mono. And so in mono, my beat sounds something like this. It sounds kind of underwhelming, but if you can get a good mix in mono, typically your stereo sound is going to sound really good. So I highly encourage using that mixing tip. And so for my master channel, I usually have these 3 effects on it. So I'll have a parametric EQ with slight cuts at about 300 hertz and 500 hertz. That way it cuts out some of the muddiness and maybe some of the harshness of those frequencies at that point. And then I put a soft clipper on it, just leave it as the stock preset. This way your drums don't clip super hard. It makes your low end sound a little cleaner. And to control the dynamics and make your beat a little louder, I personally like using Fruity Multiband Compressor. And honestly, it kind of comes down to personal preference on this one. Some people like using Fruity Limiter. I personally think this is just a whole lot easier to use, and I just like the sound that comes with it better. Typically, I go to presets and I go to mastering 2.4 decibels, and then I turn this gain up 2 notches on the scroll wheel and also make sure that the limiter is on. And so I do this because typically when you master, you want to keep at least -3 dB of headroom so that you can get your beat up to 0 without it clipping. And so just adding just that extra little bit makes your beat loud enough, and it kind of equalizes all the sounds accordingly. And after you've done all that, you can move the stereo separation on the master back to the original, and your beat sounds awesome. All right, so that's pretty much all I got. I hope you all enjoyed the video. Follow my Instagram, link will be in the description. If you like the video, hit the like. If you want to see more content like this, hit the subscribe button. Let me know what you'd like to see me do next in the comments below, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Peace.